All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Weathers. I'm here with your Vitality Project, and we're back tonight with our special guest. He comes to meet with us every other week, Doug Prater.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you today.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Doug. Yeah, thank you, Doug. It's good to have you here. Doug and I have been following developments in your Vitality Project content-wise for the last several weeks, and we're building resources for managing our bodies and our minds in recovery. We've defined recovery in a broad way to include recovery from any behaviors or attitudes or sometimes substances that keep us tamped down, that keep us operating at less than our full potential, that keep us enslaved. And so in that spirit, we've been wanting to encourage more and more fine-tuned awareness of our what's going on in our bodies and in our emotions and in our minds, only because oftentimes we'll resort to addictive behaviors to anesthetize uncomfortable feeling states. And if I don't know how I'm feeling, how can I possibly intervene to stop my moving to anesthetize it? So the logic is this: the more nuanced my self-awareness becomes, the more choices I have around alternatives to dealing with discomfort, dealing with distress. And so we've talked a lot about stress as being the number one kind of setting event for relapse to addictive behaviors, and distress, which would be stress turned into subjective discomfort, is kind of public enemy number one. So let's address that. In order to address that, I have to know when I'm distressed. And so our topic tonight is how to notice even subtle tension in our bodies. And I'm happy to go, Douglas, with that wherever you might want to, and just kind of do what we do best, which is dialogue about this. And that's kind of the context of it, but let's see where we go. So I'll hand the baton to you if you have comments and opening parry, my friend, and then we can take it from there.
Indeed. That's a great topic, Bob, and a really important one too. I mean,
thanks, Doug.
Even when it's not specifically related to addiction and some of the things that we talk about here, it's commonly expressed that in the West and probably all over the world, we carry our attention everywhere. And so many of us are just so used to it that we don't even notice these things anymore. But I found a profound difference in my own life from learning to not only to stay clean from addiction, but to just help me in other ways throughout the day, whether I'm getting ready to have a conversation with someone or whatever it is that's going on. I think back to my acting coaching that I was doing in Atlanta. And one of the exercises I expressed in the past that we learned so many incredible things in this acting class that even if I had no desire to pursue that field or line of work, it was the right place for me to be at that time. One of the things my coach encouraged was every time you go to the bathroom or whatever your cue is, so long as it happens many, many times throughout the day, to use that threshold of walking through the door to stop and take stock of what am I feeling right now? What's going on in my body?
Nice. Yeah, that's really...
Yeah, getting in the habit of really stayed with me. So
yeah. I may steal that one from you, Doug. That feels really good to me. I have to tell you something. It was almost 50 years ago that I had my first psychology class from Bill Hamilton at College of the Sequoias. And I still remember tips that he gave us in that was my first exposure. Tips like what you just shared about walking through a threshold and using that as your cue. And I've practiced some of those things for 50 years. So come check in with me 50 years from now and ask me, how's it going with the thresholds, Bob? Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great exercise. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Learning to do it, especially in times of stress too, just makes a huge difference. It's something that I've done throughout my meditation practices, but I remember specifically when I was looking over this topic today, an instance came to mind of
I'd love to hear.
sitting in a therapy session a year or so ago, and the therapist asked, "So how do you feel about that?" And it was so ingrained that I immediately went to my body to find it. I noticed, there's warmth here and some tightness over here. And the funny thing, and maybe you have something to say about this, is that I couldn't name the emotion that was conveying, but I could tell you exactly where it was in my body, and I knew how to relax to mitigate it.
Yeah, good. I'll respond briefly now, and then you can continue wherever you want to go with it. I think what you're talking about, in fact, I was thinking right before you asked me you brought up that issue for me. I was raised as a boy growing up, and was raised to dismiss physical feelings. And some of that was related to kind of gender expectations. I think that's evolved the last 65 years. But for example, to experience pain in the context of sports, you just gut it out, which was another way of you just dismiss it. And at age 65, I've got two shoulders that have borne the results of ignoring medical attention while I was an athlete in my younger life. They're completely a function of that. And if you translate that then to sitting in a therapist's office and saying, "How are you doing, Bob?" Well, if we start with where I started out, and this is exactly where I started out. My first therapy session was it was exactly 40 years ago. It was in 1980. I'm sure my therapist asked me how I'm doing, and I would not have been able to access the sensations in my body. I would not have been able to access that level that it was just associated for me. And so the therapy was about maintaining contact with that. So I credit you, Doug, and your acting instructors and so on for having that level of self-awareness. In terms of your question about being able to name it, there's actually a term in psychology, you might have come across this, that's specific to this. It's referred to as alexithymia. Okay. And understood narrowly, and I'm going to apply it narrowly right now. It literally means Lexa means to read. Thymia is emotion. A means not. So it is not being able to read emotion. It's more not being able to articulate it or express it. I can guarantee you, for me, Doug, there was a time where I couldn't have accessed the physical substrate of emotion. And if I can't access that, then anything I say about how I'm doing, I probably would have answered the therapist with some abstract piece of something to get them off my case so as to not be completely ashamed, but I wouldn't have had any way to root it in my body. So I vote for starting with what you have, and then we can find ways. It's gotten more elaborate for me over the course of my career and my therapy, where I can name feelings, but they're very much attached to that physical awareness you're talking about. Jealousy, longing, sorrow, all of these things, they have a location in our bodies. So why not start there? I'm for that. Yeah.
I suppose, to my credit, I probably could have named that complex series of emotions in that moment too, but I had reasons for not wanting to say it all right then and there. It was
yeah. That's the other thing, is that we have to be in a facilitative environment. I grew up in a family of thinkers, and I'm by nature a feeler. I can use my mind. I've used it for my career, but I'm primarily feeling as my front yard. And so feelings were kind of minimized or ignored enough so that I learned to do that myself at great cost. And then I certainly have been in relational contexts, whether at work or personal relationships, where to name emotion. I'll give an example. To name shame.
Right.
To name shame, to say I feel ashamed of myself. It's like it's forbidden. I have shame around naming shame. Yeah. And so I'm not going to be able to access that or articulate that. Another one I grew up with was anger being marginalized. Oh, yeah. And we can be in relationships where to talk about being angry or afraid or jealous, those things they're not allowed. Well, that just means that they go underground, because they don't go away just because we ban them. And so it goes. So you're right. This business of noticing our feelings, it's very much contextual. It's very much contextual. With whom am I expressing this feeling? Can I trust you? I trust you, Doug. I could express any feeling with you, but there's plenty of relationships in my life that I feel like I have to be censoring or selective, and it's painful to do that. The worst crime for me is where I start censoring to myself.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. It was a hallmark of my recovery when I was able to finally start recognizing my own anger. That was one that I had really pushed deep underground, and it was not okay to feel it. It was classic shadow projection, right? Someone in this room is angry, but it's certainly not me. So there it is. And in my recovery, when I was finally able to recognize that and own it, was a really big turning point in terms of my overall level of wellness and integration.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, this morning, Doug, it's up for me right now in a personal friendship. This morning, as I was swimming and doing my quiet time kind of inner work, I always do that. And I shouldn't do that because it's really important to me. It's like, I should do this. It's like rock on, Bob. I've got a part of me that's been very identified with spirituality really my whole life. And I'm really grateful for that part, but it has some blind spots. And one of them is what we're talking about. It doesn't know what to do with anger. It doesn't even know what to do with rightful anger. It doesn't know what to do with any anger, but that includes anger that's probably deserved or informing. Like there's anger that rises up it's about, psychology calls it the aversive motivational system. It's the part of you that draws a line in the sand and says, I won't let you do that to me. Anger informs us. That's anger that does that. And so I've prohibited that in my life, and I've a good bit of that's been confused with the kind of spiritual bypassing that has been with me, from the early development on. Even this morning, Doug, I was in this kind of inner dialogue with that spiritual part of me, really apologizing for how it's put the angry, and I think, like you just used the word, the healthfully angry part of me, it's put it out in the doghouse, out in the backyard, and it's like at great cost to me, including my sobriety in my years of active addiction and so on. And I was just feeling this there was a grieving dialogue, but it also is a reconciliation. There's no necessary divorce between the so-called spiritual part of me and the part of me that can be pissed off and let somebody know that. And in fact, they need each other to be balanced. But I was really with that this morning. And so this whole thing it continues to work itself out for me. Can I permit myself to use my anger as a signal, even to a friend, that something happened that's not okay with me and I need to let you know? And I probably will be clumsy in this. I don't want to aggress, but you're going to notice that I'm pissed off.
Yeah. Well, that's so key too, is that there are emotions that feel uncomfortable. Anger, you mentioned shame, jealousy, some of these things that aren't a pleasant feeling, but there's an important message there.
Yes.
And it's important to listen to that message and integrate it. We don't have to necessarily express it in a toxic way, because that can be a tendency for people as well, but to at least acknowledge and accept it within myself and act on what it's trying to tell me in a healthy, integrated way.
It took me a long time. Thank you, Doug. It took me a long time to not feel guilty or ashamed of being angry. It's like the feeling was demonized, and I've really changed. I still have work to do on this in terms of a free flow, but it's like anger is God-given, if we want to use that language for it, as is jealousy, as is fear, as is sorrow. We can just go down the list, as is joy. They're our birthright. We inherit them evolutionarily. I don't care what the entry point is that they don't have a moral component.
Right.
It's like if there's a moral component, it would be to look at them the way you're talking about, as very important signals, biologically, psychologically, spiritually, that these are very important signals. And so let me, I love how Rumi puts it in that poem of his, The Guest House. Do you know that poem?
Yep.
I don't know it by heart. Do you know it by heart by any chance? Yeah. He says, I'm going to try it just because it gets at it, and I won't get it right because it's been a long time since I've read it. He says, this being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival. Oh gosh, and that's where it gets. He goes. Two of the terms he uses. He says a depression, a meanness. I'll just make up a joy. That's not it, but he's naming these feelings, and he says treat each one of these guests honorably. He may be clearing out something inside of you. Each one is given as a gift from beyond. The idea is that each one of these emotions, and I particularly like the translation that describes a meanness. There's a meanness inside. There's a meanness inside. And isn't that the truth? It's like a guest house. We have these guests that go through us, and they're temporary unless we try to repress them. Then they get a little bit more permanent, I guess. But I just to be able to embrace it. It's a lifelong work. I think why that poem is so memorable to me is because I so need it.
Yeah. And of course, learning to see and recognize those things within ourselves helps us relate better to others. And how many of the stresses in our lives are due to interactions with people. Seeing what's going on in us allows for a degree of empathy and connection that otherwise is not possible.
You know, just yesterday morning, I led two groups with men at a local treatment center, and at the very end, what came up, it's painful to me, Doug. In the national news right now, there's a conversation about the racehorse analogy that's being used right now. That as with racehorses, you want to combine two top breeds with one another to create like the ultimate racehorse, and so on it goes. That analogy is used right now, and I don't really want to veer into politics right now so much as just when I read this material, it's painful to me. And I'm talking to a room full of people, including myself, that are all in recovery from addiction. And I just brought up the racehorse analogy. I said, why shouldn't we just all be executed, you guys? Because we've all been addicted. It's very touching, Doug, what came up. And it's touched by what you just said, is that we went around the room and people were sharing that they understand suffering, that they have compassion, that they hope for resilience in the face of adversity. I mean, the list went on. It was really, tear-evoking at the end of the group, because it was a surprise. This wasn't canned. We just moved into it. It was such a deep registration of the truth of what you and I are talking about, is that this whole array of emotions that are you and me, they're all to be valued. None are to be disinherited. And that it's the holding of all of that, dark and light, that makes for richness. And it felt really wonderful, Doug, to have a group of people. These are all people in early recovery from severe addiction, really embracing themselves as something other than rejects, to be marginalized and forgotten. I was very moved by it. They were too. It was really touching.
And that's one of the things that it took a long time for me to accept as well. But really, I've seen the truth of, and everyone that I've talked to, is that the people who do this work really take it seriously and make the discoveries and change the behaviors and move forward in the way that's required to get clear of addiction really are, by necessity and by transformation, some of the most beautiful souls that I've ever met.
I'm looking at one right now. Yeah. Thank you. So beautifully said, Doug. Yeah. Any other reflections, on this business of noticing what's going on in our bodies or our souls? Just anything at all. We've been talking about it and into it right now in a beautiful way, Doug. I really appreciate it. Any other thoughts that come to you?
Well, I just remember, too, that being one of the most difficult steps for me, to learn to recognize the physicality of it. I was a type that was always just so lost in my head that connecting with the body was revelatory for sure. And this, for me at least, was one of the most important steps in the process, and continues to be.
Yeah. I still remember with it's hard not to go down a shame sinkhole. My second year of internship. So this is my 6th year in a doctoral program in psychology. My final year. It was a 6-year program. I'm in my final year of internship. I'm at University of Southern California, and I had one of the best supervisors ever. Nancy Hay was my supervisor that year. And I remember at the end of the year, all of this. No, it was the beginning of the year. I take that back. It was the beginning of the year. We all met together, all the interns. There's a dozen interns at this particular site, and we were asked to do an illustration, a drawing of ourselves. Right away, that evoked self-consciousness for me, because while you and I may be gifted musicians, I believe that we are. I'm not a gifted illustrator.
Yep. You don't like that.
99% of my artistic endeavor has gone into the realm of music, and it's less than 1% in terms of graphic arts, and that's the way it's been. So there was that. But what came out of my pen that day, and I'll never forget this, and it's embarrassing to me in hindsight, is that we were given a blank piece of paper. I drew my head. And then the instructions were to draw little descriptors or something like this. And so those are long since forgotten. But I'll never forget, it wasn't Nancy, it was somebody else, another supervisor brought that up. And I'm sure I was hypersensitive to it, but made some comment about who draws a head for who they are. Yeah. And if I'd had my wits about me, I would have said, somebody who's about 5 years deep in graduate school in psychology,
yeah,
and is writing a 400-page doctoral dissertation right now. I feel pretty much like a head. I do. And it's very diagnostic. It was embarrassing to me. And the fact is, I can't blame that on studying psychology. That's just this, that was an accurate X-ray of Bob's psyche. And I think probably embarrassing experiences like that one, I think that one particularly set in motion so that within about a year, I was working with a therapist, and the therapy was very much, and I moved into therapy with somebody who was very embodied and very much of the earth. And that began to break that head only thing down. So I really want to share with you that to talk about the body, much less to talk about emotions and all the finesse that requires. I was a very, I guess, smart psychology student, but a very developmentally delayed in all other ways human being.
Yeah. And things unexpressed get stored down there too.
Yeah.
A lot of things get locked in the body and release themselves at very inopportune times, particularly when we're in danger of a relapse or something else. So allowing those things to be recognized and worked through, expressed.
We've talked about it before, but I'll reiterate it for people that are new listeners. There's a couple of quotes that come to mind that really pertain to your last observation. First of all, Sigmund Freud, the father of modern psychoanalysis himself, he defined repression as forgetting something and then forgetting that we forgot it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like a double level. First of all, you push it down, and then you forgot you pushed it down. So that's one piece. And the next piece that also comes from Freud is he said, I'm mixing that up, and this is a tired brain. I take that back. Freud wrote about repression, and he talked about the return of the repressed.
Okay.
Is that which is repressed returns, and that's your point. The quote I just gave is from a latter-day psychoanalyst, R.D. Laing. So I apologize. Everybody erase that. R.D. Laing, L-A-I-N-G. He was a Scottish psychiatrist. He's the one that took Freud's idea of repression and put that twist on it. And that combination is that when I repress something out of mind, it doesn't go out of body, and it will manifest symptomatically. And it might manifest as an ulcer. For people like you and I that have a history of addiction in our past, I know that for me, that which is repressed will manifest, if it builds up enough, it'll manifest in relapse. Yes. And it's no joke for me. I've experienced that. I don't really want to replicate that. And so it's non-optional. Maybe some people can afford to repress anger and they just develop acne. I'm saying that because I did. I did as a kid. But at some point, acne transferred into addiction. Yes. And then it becomes life-threatening and relationship ruining and potentiality crippling.
Yeah. And that absolutely makes it, as uncomfortable as it is, worth doing, worth remembering to do.
Yeah. We're going to be unpacking over the next days of our posts what to do with this tonight. This is kind of the entry point, Doug. I'm glad that it was with you. This idea of just the exercise for today and the post today was to see if we could notice with a little bit more subtle nuance what's going on in our bodies. And ironically, it's because it seems kind of counterintuitive, I was asking for people to think of self-improvement projects, like of the order of a New Year's resolution, and just notice how it feels in your body. Ask for people to generate a half a dozen ideas that they have for fixing themselves, ourselves, and then to go back and review each one of those items and read it and just sit and do what you talked about doing in the therapist's office. How does it feel to me to want to work on exercising more, on eating less, on being a better parent, on whatever is ... How does that feel? And it's an odd thing to ask people to do, but there's method to this madness. We want to start looking at how even our ideals, our goals, our aspirations, how those can trip us up depending on how we hold them. So that's where this is going. And it takes being able to just pause and notice how I am feeling. Do I feel coldness in my hands? Do I feel tautness in my belly or my torso? I mean, it gets right down to that. Yeah.
Because for most of those things, of course, there's and looking at our reactions from a physical place as we start cracking.
I'm glad we met to talk about this tonight. I'm glad it was with you, Douglas. Thank you. Thank you. There'll be more to follow for sure. In fact, when we come back in a couple of weeks, God willing, we'll still be working this material and we can remember when tonight, which is really kicking it off. Yeah. We'll be talking much more about this relationship between our thoughts and sometimes those thoughts are negative, sometimes those thoughts are positive, and our emotional states, our body states, and how that relates to leveraging our self-awareness for the sake of sustained recovery. So that's really the goal here. So yeah. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate your time. And I know that it's a few hours later, and I wish you a good evening. And thank you for having the generosity to join us tonight. Always appreciate you being here, brother.
Thank you for having me on, Bob. It's a pleasure as always. I look forward to the next posts.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Good night to you. Take good care. Bye-bye, Doug. Bye-bye.